Sometimes the worst moment of your life isn't the one that breaks your heart. It's the one that quietly introduces you to the people who will help put it back together. Ethan Brooks never imagined those words would become the truest thing anyone had ever said about him. Friday evenings usually belonged to his daughter. 8-year-old Lily insisted on homemade pepperoni pizza, a rented family movie, and hot chocolate no matter the season. It was their tradition, the kind built from small promises after too many big losses. But this Friday was different. Lily had spent an entire week convincing him to accept an invitation from Olivia Carter, one of the friendliest women at the engineering firm where he worked. Olivia had smiled over lunch on Tuesday and casually mentioned that her younger sister had finally agreed to try a blind date. Ethan had laughed at first, almost spilling his coffee. He hadn't been on a real date since his wife passed away 5 years earlier. Between overtime, soccer practices, grocery bills, science projects, and bedtime stories, there had never seemed to be room for anything else. Yet Lily had looked up from her cereal that morning with those bright blue eyes that always reminded him of happier days. "Daddy," she had whispered, "Mom would want someone to make you smile again." Children had a way of saying impossible things with complete sincerity. So now, wearing the only navy blazer he still owned, Ethan stood outside Bellamy's Steakhouse in downtown Chicago, staring through the tall glass windows while wondering whether he still remembered how to be anything other than somebody's father. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light. Crystal glasses reflected soft golden chandeliers. Quiet jazz floated through the dining room while conversations blended into a comfortable murmur. The scent of grilled steak, fresh rosemary, and warm bread drifted through the entrance every time the door opened. Ethan adjusted his watch, suddenly feeling underdressed despite spending 20 minutes ironing his shirt. He took one slow breath before stepping inside. "Reservation for Carter," the hostess asked with a welcoming smile after checking her tablet. Ethan nodded politely. "Right this way." She led him between candlelit tables until she stopped beside a corner booth near the windows. Ethan's footsteps froze. His heartbeat stumbled. Sitting calmly at the table, reviewing something on a leather portfolio beside an untouched glass of sparkling water, was Laura Bennett, his boss, the CEO who rarely left the executive floor, the woman every employee admired but quietly feared. She looked up at exactly the same moment he recognized her. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them seemed prepared for what they were seeing. Ethan's mind raced through every possibility except the right one. Had he accidentally been called into a meeting? Was this some forgotten company dinner? Had he misunderstood Olivia completely? Laura looked just as surprised, her composed expression cracking for the briefest second before she slowly closed the folder in front of her. Then, from somewhere behind him, Olivia's cheerful voice echoed across the restaurant. "Perfect. Everybody's here." Ethan turned slowly, unaware that the ordinary evening he had almost canceled was already becoming the moment that would quietly change every chapter of his life. Olivia stepped forward with the effortless confidence of someone who believed every awkward situation could be fixed with a smile. She wrapped Ethan in a quick, friendly hug before gesturing toward the woman beside her. "Ethan, this is my younger sister, Claire Morgan." Claire offered a warm smile that reached her hazel eyes before extending her hand. "I have heard nothing but good things about you." Ethan accepted the handshake, noticing how relaxed she seemed compared to the storm building inside his own head. "I hope Olivia did not exaggerate too much," he answered with an embarrassed laugh. "Only the good parts," Olivia teased. "The stubborn parts one left out." Claire laughed softly, the kind of laugh that made the table feel lighter for a brief moment. Then everyone looked toward Laura Bennett. Olivia's cheerful expression brightened even more. "And since the universe apparently enjoys surprises, this is Laura Bennett. Claire and I have known each other for years through a local charity board." Ethan blinked. His thoughts scattered all over again. Laura slowly rose from her chair, her calm posture never changing even though surprise still lingered behind her composed expression. "Good evening, Ethan." Her voice sounded exactly the same as it did during Monday executive meetings. Professional, measured, impossible to read. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett," Ethan replied, instinctively straightening his shoulders. Laura's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Tonight, I believe Laura will be enough." That single sentence confused him even more. Olivia looked from one face to another before laughing. "I completely forgot you two work together." "Well, that explains those expressions." Ethan forced a polite smile, but inside he was replaying every conversation he had ever had with Laura. Had he missed a deadline? Forgotten an email? Made an expensive mistake? Claire quietly noticed the tension. "Do you always look this nervous around your boss?" she asked with a playful grin. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Only on days that unexpectedly become performance reviews." Laura surprised everyone by letting out a genuine laugh, soft enough to turn several nearby heads. "I can assure you this is not a performance review." A waiter arrived with menus, giving everyone a welcome excuse to breathe. Candlelight danced across polished silverware while the mellow jazz trio in the corner shifted into a slower melody. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of white lights reflecting off passing cars. Ethan opened his menu but realized he had not read a single word. Every instinct told him he should excuse himself and leave before the evening became even stranger. Yet every time he glanced toward Claire, she offered another reassuring smile, completely unaware of the strange balance forming around the table. She seemed refreshingly genuine, asking simple questions instead of trying to impress anyone. "Olivia says you design infrastructure systems," Claire said. "That sounds much more interesting than she made it sound." Ethan smiled faintly. "Most days it is spreadsheets, coffee, and trying to solve problems before they become expensive." "That sounds like life," Claire replied. Laura quietly listened without interrupting, occasionally lifting her glass but saying very little. Ethan noticed something unusual. At work, she always controlled every conversation with remarkable confidence. Tonight, she seemed content simply watching him. Not judging, not evaluating, just observing. It unsettled him far more than criticism ever could. Deep down, he sensed this dinner had already drifted far away from an ordinary blind date, although he still had no idea why. The waiter returned with fresh bread still warm from the oven, and for the first time since sitting down, the conversation began to settle into something almost comfortable. Claire spoke about restoring historic homes on weekends, explaining how she loved preserving stories hidden inside old walls. Olivia joked that her sister could spend an hour admiring century-old brickwork while everyone else wondered where to park. Ethan found himself smiling more naturally. "That sounds a little like engineering," he said. "People only notice your work when something falls apart." Claire laughed. "Exactly. The best work is usually invisible." Laura quietly glanced toward Ethan before lowering her eyes to her glass, as though that sentence had reminded her of something she had overlooked for a very long time. Their meals arrived, filling the air with the comforting aroma of grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, and fresh herbs. Soft candlelight reflected across polished plates while the pianist near the entrance eased into another gentle melody. For several peaceful minutes, nobody mentioned work. Ethan almost forgot who was sitting across from him until Laura casually asked, "How is the Riverside expansion coming along?" His fork paused halfway to his plate. "It is progressing well," he answered carefully. "The drainage calculations should be finalized next week." Laura nodded once. "Good." That was all she said, yet Ethan immediately slipped back into employee mode. Claire noticed the change before anyone else. His shoulders stiffened. His voice became measured. Even his smile faded slightly. She tilted her head with quiet curiosity. "Does everyone become this formal around their boss?" Olivia laughed into her iced tea. "Only Ethan." Ethan sighed with a self-conscious smile. Occupational hazard. Claire studied him for another moment. There was kindness in his face, but also exhaustion that could not have come from long workdays alone. She sensed there was another story hidden beneath the polished answers. Before she could ask another question, Ethan's phone vibrated gently against the table. He immediately reached for it, his expression changing the instant he saw the caller. The tension disappeared as though someone had switched on a light inside him. "Please excuse me," he said softly. "It is my daughter." Claire watched him answer with an entirely different voice than the one she had heard all evening. "Hi, sweetheart." His smile became effortless. "Did Grandma remember extra marshmallows for your hot chocolate?" A tiny, cheerful voice filled the speaker just loudly enough for the others to hear faint laughter. Ethan chuckled. "That is wonderful. Did you finish building the volcano for science class?" Another excited stream of words followed. He listened without interrupting, nodding as though every detail mattered. "I told you the baking soda would work," he said proudly. "Yes, I promise I will bring home your favorite chocolate cheesecake if they still have some." He paused before adding with unmistakable warmth, "I will be home before bedtime. I would not miss our story together." Claire looked down for a moment, hiding an unexpected smile. She had dated successful men before, men with impressive resumes and polished manners, but none whose face transformed so completely during a simple conversation with their child. Across the table, Laura remained perfectly still. Her composed expression softened almost imperceptibly as she listened to Ethan patiently answer one more question before saying, "I love you too, Lily. I will see you soon." When the call ended, silence lingered for a heartbeat. Not awkward silence. The quiet kind that appears when everyone has just witnessed something honest. Claire finally spoke, her voice gentler than before. "She sounds like a very lucky little girl." Ethan looked at the dark screen in his hand before slipping the phone back into his pocket. "No," he answered with quiet conviction. "I am the lucky one." Claire held Ethan's answer in thoughtful silence for several seconds before smiling again, although this time there was something quieter behind it. It was no longer simple curiosity. It was respect beginning to take root. She rested her hands around her glass of iced tea. "Lily sounds wonderful," she said. "How old is she?" "She turned 8 in April," Ethan replied. "She reminds me every week that she is almost 9. Olivia laughed. "That sounds about right." Ethan nodded with an affectionate smile. According to her, being almost 9 means she should be allowed to stay up until 10 o'clock and eat pancakes for dinner whenever she wants. Claire smiled warmly. "Smart girl." "Very smart," Ethan agreed. "She negotiates like an attorney and somehow always wins." Even Laura allowed herself another small smile before quietly taking a sip of sparkling water. Claire hesitated before asking her next question. "If you do not mind me asking, do you have family nearby to help?" Ethan looked toward the candle between them, watching its gentle flame flicker against the polished tabletop. "My mother helps whenever she can. Lily loves spending Friday evenings with her grandmother." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Most of the time it is just the two of us." Claire understood the meaning without needing him to explain further. "I am sorry," she said softly. Ethan offered a grateful nod. Life changes people, sometimes in ways they never expect. There was no bitterness in his voice, no complaint, only quiet acceptance. The pianist began playing an old American standard that drifted gently through the restaurant, blending with the soft conversations around them. Outside, light rain had started falling across the Chicago streets, turning the reflections of passing headlights into ribbons of gold across the sidewalk. Claire found herself wondering how many evenings this man had spent helping with homework after exhausting workdays, cooking dinner, folding laundry, paying bills, and still finding enough energy to read bedtime stories. He never spoke about sacrifice as though he deserved praise. He simply described ordinary days that suddenly felt extraordinary because of the love hidden inside them. Olivia leaned toward her sister with an amused grin. "You know, I have been trying to convince Ethan to date again for almost 2 years." Ethan groaned playfully. You are making it sound like a full-time project. Because it has been, Olivia replied. Every excuse imaginable. Too busy. Too tired. Soccer practice. School concerts. Science fairs. Broken washing machine. Grocery shopping. Ethan chuckled quietly. Those were all real reasons. They were, Olivia admitted. But none of them were the real reason. Claire looked gently toward Ethan without pressing him. He remained silent for a few moments before finally answering for himself. The real reason, he said carefully, was that I worried nobody would want to build a future with someone whose first priority would always be his daughter. The words settled over the table with surprising weight. Nobody rushed to answer. Nobody tried to reassure him with empty compliments. Laura lowered her eyes, thoughtfully tracing one finger along the rim of her glass. Olivia's smile faded into quiet sympathy. Claire simply looked at Ethan, seeing not insecurity but honesty. Finally she spoke. The right person would never ask you to change that. Ethan met her eyes for the first time since arriving. Something calm passed between them, something impossible to force or pretend. Across the table, Laura noticed it too. She quietly folded her hands together beneath the candlelight, saying nothing at all. Yet behind her composed expression, another decision seemed to be slowly taking shape, one that neither Ethan nor Claire could possibly have anticipated. The gentle glow of the candles seemed warmer now, and for a few precious minutes the conversation drifted naturally from childhood memories to favorite vacation spots and the small traditions that quietly stitched families together. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he had not expected. Claire listened more than she spoke, asking thoughtful questions instead of trying to fill every silence. Olivia watched the two of them with unmistakable satisfaction, occasionally hiding a smile behind her coffee cup. Laura remained unusually quiet, her attention moving from one face to another as though she were carefully measuring something that could not be entered into a spreadsheet. Dessert menus had just arrived when Laura slowly placed her napkin beside her plate and stood. Ethan instinctively followed, believing she was signaling the end of the evening or perhaps asking him to discuss work in private. His stomach tightened. "Excuse me for a moment," Laura said calmly. Instead of walking away, she turned toward Ethan. "Actually, there is something I have wanted to say for quite some time." The words immediately caught everyone's attention. Even the waiter paused several feet away before politely stepping back. Ethan felt every muscle in his shoulders stiffen. "Laura," he began carefully, "if this is about the Riverside project, I can come by your office first thing Monday morning." She looked at him with quiet surprise before gently shaking her head. "No, Ethan. It is not about a project." The restaurant seemed to grow strangely still. The soft piano continued playing in the background. Silverware clinked faintly from distant tables, and rain tapped gently against the tall windows. Yet everything around their table felt suspended. Laura folded her hands together and took a slow breath. "I have spent years leading hundreds of employees," she said. "People often assume that means I notice everything. The truth is, sometimes the people doing the most important work are the easiest to overlook." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "I do not understand." "I know," Laura answered with a small smile. "That is entirely my fault." Claire quietly exchanged a glance with Olivia, both equally uncertain where the conversation was heading. Laura continued, "Every quarterly report tells me who delivers results. Every department manager tells me who solves difficult problems. But there is one thing reports never measure." She looked directly at Ethan. "Character." Ethan lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable with becoming the center of attention. "I am only doing my job." Laura shook her head once more. "That is exactly what you always say." She paused before continuing. 6 months ago, during the electrical failure at the Riverside expansion, several departments were preparing for delays that would have cost the company millions of dollars. Before anyone at the executive level even understood the scope of the problem, one engineer quietly stayed through the weekend, reorganized the entire infrastructure plan, coordinated 3 contractors, and prevented the delay without asking for recognition. Claire slowly turned toward Ethan. That was you. Ethan shifted uneasily in his chair. It was a team effort. Laura smiled gently. You submitted every solution under your team's names instead of your own. Ethan gave a modest shrug. They earned the credit too. Laura's voice softened. Do you know why I eventually discovered what happened? Ethan shook his head. Because every single person on that project, from senior managers to new interns, independently told me the same sentence. She looked at him with unmistakable respect. If Ethan says he has it covered, you can sleep peacefully. Silence settled over the table. Claire did not see an ambitious executive chasing praise. She saw a quiet man who carried responsibility the same way he carried fatherhood, without applause, without complaint, and without expecting anyone to notice. Ethan looked almost embarrassed by the attention, wishing the conversation would move elsewhere. Laura noticed his discomfort and smiled warmly. You see, Ethan, I did not stand up tonight to embarrass you. She paused, her eyes filled with quiet sincerity. I stood because I realized I should have thanked you a long time ago. For a long moment, Ethan simply looked at Laura, unsure how to respond. Recognition had never been something he chased. In fact, he had spent years quietly stepping away whenever praise found its way toward him. He smiled politely, almost apologetically. Thank you, he said. But honestly, anyone on that team would have done the same thing. Laura gently shook her head. No, Ethan, they would not have. Her answer was calm, but it carried the kind of certainty that could not be argued away. She slowly returned to her chair, and only then did everyone else sit down again. The waiter quietly refilled water glasses, sensing that something meaningful had just unfolded. The warm scent of fresh coffee drifted across the restaurant as nearby conversations gradually resumed, yet Claire barely noticed any of it. She was still studying the man sitting across from her. Earlier that evening, she had seen a quiet engineer who seemed nervous around his supervisor. Now she was beginning to see someone entirely different. Why did you never tell anyone? She finally asked. Ethan looked genuinely puzzled. Tell them what? That you saved the project. He smiled modestly. Because the project was never about me. Claire leaned forward slightly. Most people would have mentioned it at least once. Ethan folded his hands together on the table. Maybe, but I always figured results speak louder than resumes. His answer lingered between them. It was not rehearsed. It sounded like a principle he had lived by for years. Olivia smiled knowingly. That is Ethan. Half the office has stories like that. Ethan looked at her with playful disbelief. Please do not encourage this. Olivia laughed. Too late. She turned toward Claire. Do you remember when our department lost power during that ice storm last winter? Claire nodded. You said everyone had to work from home for a week. Almost, Olivia replied. Except Ethan drove nearly 40 miles through terrible weather just to make sure the backup server stayed online, because he knew several hospitals depended on our systems. Ethan immediately interrupted. The maintenance crew was there too. Because you called them, Olivia answered with a grin. And then you stayed until almost midnight. Ethan shrugged again. Someone had to. Claire noticed something fascinating. Every compliment made him uncomfortable, yet every explanation focused on someone else. He never denied helping. He simply refused to place himself at the center of the story. Laura quietly watched Claire's expression changing little by little. It was exactly what she had hoped would happen. Not admiration for success, but appreciation for character. Claire rested her elbows lightly against the table and smiled at Ethan. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever turned down a promotion? Ethan hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. Twice. Olivia sighed dramatically. Actually, 3 times. Ethan laughed under his breath. You keep better records than human resources. Claire blinked in surprise. 3 promotions? They would have required extensive travel, Ethan explained. Some weeks I would have been away 4 or 5 nights. He glanced briefly at the photo of Lily that appeared on his phone's lock screen as it rested beside his plate. I promised my daughter that no matter how busy life became, she would always know where to find me at bedtime whenever possible. Claire felt something tighten gently inside her chest. She had met successful men who collected titles, expensive watches, and impressive business cards. Ethan had quietly chosen bedtime stories over corner offices. Laura lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking again. Do you know the only request Ethan has ever made in 5 years? Everyone looked toward her. She smiled softly. He once asked if we could move a Monday executive meeting from 7 o'clock to 8:30 because he did not want to miss Lily's elementary school music performance. Ethan looked embarrassed all over again. I thought we agreed never to mention that. Laura smiled warmly. I never agreed. I simply never forgot. Claire looked at Ethan with entirely different eyes now, realizing that the greatest thing about the man across from her was not what he had accomplished, but everything he had quietly chosen to put before himself. Claire slowly leaned back in her chair, her fingers loosely wrapped around her coffee cup, but she no longer seemed focused on the drink. Her attention never left Ethan. The quiet confidence she had seen in him earlier now made perfect sense. It was not confidence built from promotions or praise. It came from years of choosing what mattered most. Outside, the rain continued falling in soft silver lines across the restaurant windows, while passing headlights painted moving reflections over the polished floor. The pianist shifted into another familiar melody, gentle enough to let conversations breathe without interruption. Olivia looked around the table with a satisfied smile before finally confessing, "There is actually something the three of you probably do not know." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Not at all." Olivia laughed. "Although you might be surprised." Laura quietly looked toward Olivia but said nothing, allowing her to continue. Olivia folded her hands together. "A few months ago, Laura and I were volunteering at the literacy fundraiser downtown." Claire nodded. "I remember. I could not attend because I was out of state. We started talking about work," Olivia continued. Naturally, Ethan's name came up. Ethan looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope only good things." "Only the truthful things," Olivia replied with a grin. "I mentioned that the nicest man in our office had somehow stayed single for years." Ethan sighed dramatically. "I am beginning to regret coming tonight." Everyone laughed, including Laura. It was a softer, more relaxed laugh than anyone in the office would have believed possible. Olivia continued. "Laura asked why someone like you never dated." Ethan looked at his boss with genuine surprise. "You asked about me?" Laura nodded without hesitation. "I did." "Why?" Ethan asked. Laura rested her hands quietly on the table before answering. "Because leadership is not only about knowing what people accomplish. It is also about noticing when good people carry burdens alone for too long." Ethan looked down, searching for words that refused to come. Laura continued gently. "Olivia told me about Lily. She told me how every vacation day, every schedule request, every career decision revolved around making sure your daughter never felt abandoned after losing her mother." Claire's eyes slowly turned back toward Ethan. The restaurant around them seemed to fade into the background. Then, Olivia said with a smile, "I joked that my sister would probably like someone exactly like Ethan." Claire laughed quietly. "You conveniently left out that part when you invited me." "Because I wanted you to meet him," Olivia answered. "Not his biography." Ethan looked completely astonished. "Wait." He glanced from Olivia to Laura and back again. "Are you telling me this dinner did not happen by accident?" Laura answered first. "No." Her voice remained calm, almost tender. "It did not." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "You knew?" "I knew Olivia wanted to introduce you to Claire," Laura admitted. "When she mentioned the restaurant, I realized I already had a dinner scheduled here with members of the charity board. After the meeting ended, I decided to stay for a few minutes." Claire looked at Laura curiously. "Why?" Laura smiled faintly before answering with complete honesty. Because I wanted to see whether the man everyone respected at work was the same man outside the office. Ethan looked almost uncomfortable hearing those words. You could have simply asked. Laura slowly shook her head. Character is rarely found in interviews or performance evaluations. It reveals itself when someone believes nobody important is watching. Silence settled over the table once again. Ethan glanced toward the rain beyond the windows before quietly saying, The truth is, I was never trying to impress anyone. Claire smiled with unmistakable warmth. That, she answered softly, might be the most impressive thing about you. Laura lowered her eyes with a peaceful smile, realizing that without saying another word, Ethan had already passed the only test that had ever mattered. The conversation lingered comfortably after that, no longer filled with uncertainty, but with an easy rhythm that surprised everyone at the table. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in years, while Claire discovered that beneath his quiet nature was a dry sense of humor that appeared only when he felt completely at ease. Olivia watched the two of them with obvious satisfaction, convinced her unlikely plan had worked far better than she had imagined. Laura, meanwhile, sat back with a peaceful expression, saying little and simply enjoying the rare opportunity to see one of her most dependable employees smiling without the weight of deadlines resting on his shoulders. Then, from across the dining room, a nervous voice interrupted the gentle atmosphere. I am so sorry. Every head turned toward the entrance. A young waiter stood beside an elderly couple whose dessert had accidentally been delivered to another table. The young man's shoulders were tense, his face flushed with embarrassment as he apologized repeatedly. I promise I will fix this immediately. The older gentleman smiled kindly, but the waiter still looked devastated by such a simple mistake. Ethan noticed something almost no one else did. The young employee kept glancing toward the restaurant manager, clearly afraid he had disappointed someone on one of his first shifts. Ethan quietly excused himself. I will be right back. Claire watched as he walked calmly across the dining room, without hesitation. He approached the young waiter with the same gentle patience he used while speaking to Lily. They exchanged only a few quiet sentences. No dramatic gestures. No lectures. Ethan simply smiled, placed a reassuring hand lightly against the young man's shoulder for a brief moment, and pointed toward the kitchen with an encouraging nod. The waiter took a slow breath before smiling for the first time in several minutes. Together, they carried fresh desserts back to the elderly couple. Ethan politely apologized on behalf of no one in particular, making the situation feel less like a mistake and more like an ordinary part of a busy evening. The older woman laughed warmly. Young man, she said, after 50 years of marriage, we have learned that warm company matters much more than perfect timing. Ethan smiled. That sounds like wisdom worth remembering. The couple thanked the waiter, who stood noticeably taller now that his confidence had returned. As Ethan walked back toward his own table, the restaurant manager quietly stepped out from behind the host's stand and stopped him. Claire could not hear every word, but she saw the manager extend his hand with sincere appreciation. Ethan simply shook it, smiled modestly, and returned without mentioning the exchange. Everything all right? Claire asked. Ethan nodded as though nothing remarkable had happened. Just a young employee having a difficult first week. We have all been there. Laura looked at him thoughtfully. You knew exactly what to say. Ethan shrugged gently. People usually remember how someone made them feel much longer than they remember the mistake itself. Silence settled over the table once more, but this time it spread beyond their corner booth. The elderly couple glanced toward Ethan with grateful smiles. The relieved waiter quietly thanked him again while passing by with another tray. Even the restaurant manager offered a respectful nod from across the room. Claire watched all of it without saying a word. Earlier that evening, she had admired Ethan because of what others revealed about him. Now she had witnessed his character with her own eyes. No audience. No expectation of recognition. Just simple kindness offered to someone who needed it. She realized then that true strength rarely announced itself. It quietly restored confidence in others, one small moment at a time. And somehow, without trying to become the center of the room, Ethan had once again become the person everyone remembered. The evening slowly drew toward its end, but no one seemed eager to leave. Empty coffee cups rested beside dessert plates. The candles had burned lower, and beyond the rain-covered windows the city shimmered beneath thousands of lights reflecting across wet streets. The restaurant had grown quieter as families headed home, leaving behind only the gentle music of the piano and the comforting hum of conversations that had softened into whispers. Ethan glanced at his watch and smiled apologetically. I should probably get going. I promised Lily I would be home before she falls asleep. Claire nodded with understanding rather than disappointment. A promise like that should never be broken. Ethan stood, reaching for his jacket. Thank you. Tonight was unexpected. Olivia laughed. That might be the nicest way anyone has ever described one of my plans. Even Laura smiled. As they walked together toward the entrance, the cool evening air drifted inside each time the front door opened. The scent of fresh rain mixed with roasted coffee from a nearby cafe, making the entire block feel calm despite the busy downtown traffic. Just before Ethan stepped outside, Claire quietly spoke his name. Would you wait a second? He turned. She walked over until they stood only a few feet apart beneath the warm light above the restaurant entrance. Can I ask you one last question? Of course. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. If tonight had been an ordinary blind date without surprises, without your boss, without everything that happened, would you have wanted to see me again? Ethan smiled with the same quiet honesty she had come to recognize throughout the evening. Yes. He did not hesitate. He did not search for clever words. Because from the moment we started talking, you never seemed interested in what I could accomplish. You were interested in who I was. Claire's eyes brightened. That is exactly the answer I was hoping for. She reached into her purse, removed a small business card, and turned it over. On the blank back, she carefully wrote her personal phone number before handing it to him. This time, she said with a gentle smile, I would like our next dinner to happen without executive witnesses. Ethan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I think I would like that too. A few steps behind them, Olivia quietly leaned toward Laura. Well, she whispered. Laura watched Ethan carefully fold the card into his wallet instead of casually slipping it into a pocket. It was such a small gesture, yet it revealed everything about how seriously he treated meaningful things. Laura smiled peacefully. I have spent years trying to identify future leaders, she said softly. Tonight reminded me that the finest people are often the ones who never ask to be noticed. Ethan opened the passenger door of his truck before looking back one last time. Claire lifted her hand in a small wave. He returned it with an easy smile before driving away into the gentle rain, eager to keep the promise he had made to his little girl. 20 minutes later, he quietly unlocked the front door of his home. The lights in the living room were dim except for one lamp beside the couch. Lily was still awake, wrapped in her favorite blanket with a storybook resting across her knees. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. Daddy, she whispered, did you have a good time? Ethan knelt beside her and kissed the top of her head. I did. Will you see her again? She asked hopefully. Ethan looked toward the rain tapping softly against the window before smiling to himself. I think I will. Lily grinned with complete confidence. I knew it. Ethan carried her to bed, read their favorite story exactly as promised, and quietly turned off the bedroom light. As he gently closed the door behind him, he realized something he had forgotten during years of simply surviving. Sometimes grace does not arrive with grand speeches or dramatic miracles. Sometimes it quietly takes a seat at an ordinary dinner table, waits patiently through every misunderstanding, and reminds a weary heart that dignity, kindness, and faithful love always find their way home.